For more than 60 years, the voice of Smokey Robinson has been part of people's lives. His songs played on car radios during long drives. They played at weddings, late-night parties, and quiet moments when someone needed a little comfort. For decades, his voice carried a softness that felt almost timeless. But recently, something happened that left many fans stunned. At 86 years old, Smokey Robinson sat down in front of a camera and recorded a message. It wasn't a concert announcement. It wasn't a new album. And it wasn't a celebration of his long career. Instead, it sounded like a farewell. The message was simple. Smokey speaking directly to the people who had listened to him for generations. His voice was calm, slower than people remembered, but still warm, still familiar. He looked into the camera and thanked the fans who had supported him since the beginning. He talked about the journey, about the years on the road, about the music that changed his life. Then he said something that made people stop and listen closely. Smokey Robinson had been performing well into his 80s. Just a few years ago, he was still stepping on stage, smiling at the crowd, and singing songs that had first been recorded in the 1960s. His voice had aged, of course. That happens to everyone. But the feeling was still there. So when fans heard him talk about saying goodbye, it didn't feel like a normal career decision. It felt heavier. People who had followed him for decades began revisiting old interviews, old performances, old moments from his life. Because the truth is, Smokey Robinson has lived many different lives inside one long career. He wasn't just a singer. He was one of the architects of a sound that changed American music. Back in the early 1960s, a small record company in Detroit began releasing songs that would reshape pop and soul music forever. That company was Motown Records. And Smokey Robinson was there from the very beginning. He helped create the sound. He wrote songs that would become classics. He performed music that people still listen to today. Over the years, his voice carried stories of love, heartbreak, and hope. Songs like The Tracks of My Tears and The Tears of a Clown didn't just become hits. They became part of American culture. For generations of listeners, Smokey Robinson wasn't just another singer from the Motown era. He was the voice that helped define it. But behind that voice was a life that wasn't always easy. The smooth songs didn't tell the whole story. There were struggles. Moments when the pressure nearly broke him. Moments when he almost walked away from music long before now. That's why this new message felt different to the people who knew his story. Because Smokey Robinson had come close to the edge before. And every time, he somehow found his way back. But now he was 86 years old. The long tours were harder. The late nights were harder. The travel that once felt exciting could now feel exhausting. Time has a way of slowly catching up with everyone. Even legends. And that's why, when Smokey Robinson spoke into that camera, thanking the fans and hinting that the end of the road might finally be here, people didn't just hear a goodbye. They heard the closing chapter of one of the longest and most important careers in American music. To understand why this moment matters, you have to go back to the beginning. Back before the fame. Before the awards. Before the world knew the name Smokey Robinson. Back to a neighborhood in Detroit, where a quiet kid with a love for poetry and music had no idea that one day his voice would travel across the world. Smokey Robinson was born in 1940 in Detroit. At the time, Detroit was a busy industrial city. The auto industry was booming, and people from all over the country were moving there looking for work. Factories ran day and night. The streets were filled with workers heading to long shifts at car plants. Life could be tough, but the city was full of energy. Smokey grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the north side of the city. The houses were small. Families lived close together. Kids played in the streets until the streetlights came on. His real name was William Robinson Jr. The nickname, Smokey, came later. Some people said it came from a family friend who gave him the name when he was young. Others said it came from the way he carried himself as a kid. Either way, the name stuck. By the time he was a teenager, almost everyone around him called him Smokey. Music was everywhere in Detroit during those years. Church choirs sang every Sunday. Radios played rhythm and blues from Chicago and New York. And young people gathered on street corners singing harmonies late into the night. Smokey loved those moments. Even as a kid, he had a soft voice that stood out. But what really made him different was something else. He loved words. Long before he thought about becoming a professional singer, Smokey Robinson loved poetry. He wrote lines in notebooks. He paid attention to how words sounded together. That interest would later shape his songwriting style. But back then, he was just a teenager walking through the neighborhoods of Detroit with friends, dreaming about music. At Northern High School, Smokey met several young men who shared the same dream. One of them was a friend named Ronnie White. Another was Pete Moore. Like Smokey, they loved the vocal groups that were popular at the time. Groups like the Orioles and the Clovers. Those groups inspired them to try singing together. First, it was just for fun. They would gather after school, stand close together, and practice harmonies. Sometimes they sang on street corners. Sometimes they sang in small school events. Eventually, they decided to form a group. At first, they called themselves the Five Chimes. The name didn't last long. Like many young groups trying to break into the music world, they changed names a few times while trying to figure out who they were. But one thing was already clear. Smokey Robinson was the leader. He wrote many of the songs the group practiced. He helped arrange the harmonies. And his voice often carried the lead melody. Even as a teenager, people around him noticed something unusual. He had a calm confidence. Not loud, not flashy, just steady. During those years, the group began performing at small local events around Detroit. Talent shows, school dances, community gatherings. Most of the time they weren't paid. Sometimes they were lucky to get a free meal or a small tip. But every performance helped them get better. Smokey spent hours writing songs in his room. Sometimes he stayed up late trying to find the right words for a melody. He didn't know it yet, but those long nights of writing would later turn him into one of the most respected songwriters in American music. But at the time, everything still felt uncertain. Thousands of young people across the country dreamed about making it in music. Very few actually did. Still, Smokey Robinson kept writing. He kept singing. And eventually, one performance would change everything. A performance that would introduce him to a man who was about to start a small record company that would soon change the music industry forever. By the late 1950s, Smokey Robinson and his friends were taking their music more seriously. The group had gone through several name changes, but they were slowly developing a sound of their own. Eventually, they settled on the name The Miracles. At that time, they were still just another young vocal group trying to get noticed. They played small gigs around Detroit and nearby cities. Sometimes they traveled in crowded cars to perform in tiny clubs. Money was tight. Most nights they were lucky if the show covered the cost of gas. But Smokey believed in the group. He kept writing songs and pushing them to keep practicing. Then one night in 1957, something important happened. The Miracles had a chance to audition for a music manager who was helping local artists find recording opportunities. That manager was a young songwriter named Gordy. At the time, Gordy wasn't famous yet. He had written songs for other artists, but he was still trying to figure out his place in the music business. When Smokey Robinson met him, the connection was immediate. Gordy listened closely to the songs Smokey had written. He noticed something different about them. The lyrics were more poetic than most rhythm and blues songs at the time. They felt emotional without sounding dramatic. Gordy saw potential. Soon the two young men began talking regularly about music, songwriting, and the future. Those conversations eventually led to something bigger. Gordy decided to start his own record label in Detroit. That label would become Motown Records. In the early days, Motown was nothing like the music empire it would later become. The studio was small. Equipment was limited. The budget was almost non-existent. But the energy inside that building was electric. Young artists gathered there every day. Writers worked late into the night. Musicians experimented with new sounds. Smokey Robinson became one of the central figures in that early Motown family. Not just as a singer, but as a songwriter. He began writing songs for the Miracles and for other artists connected to the label. Soon the group started recording tracks that would slowly gain attention. One of their early hits was Shop Around. The song became a huge success. It climbed the charts and helped prove that Motown could compete with major record companies. For Smokey Robinson, it was the beginning of a completely new life. Suddenly, the small neighborhood kid from Detroit was becoming a national recording artist. The Miracles began touring across the country. Crowds were growing larger. Fans were starting to recognize Smokey's voice the moment it came through the speakers. And behind the scenes, Motown itself was growing quickly. New artists were joining the label. Groups like the Temptations and the Supremes would soon become household names. And Smokey Robinson would play an important role in shaping the sound that connected all of them. But in those early days, none of them could fully see what was coming. They were just young musicians in Detroit, working long hours in a small studio, chasing a dream that still felt fragile. The success would come. The fame would come. But so would the pressure. And the life Smokey Robinson was stepping into would demand more from him than he ever expected. By the early 1960s, things were starting to move quickly for Smokey Robinson. What had started as a small group of young singers in Detroit was now becoming part of something much bigger. The little label run by Gordy was growing fast, and Motown Records was starting to make noise across the country. Inside the Motown studio, the schedule was relentless. Artists were recording during the day. Writers were working through the night. Musicians were constantly rehearsing new songs. Everyone wanted to create the next hit. And in the middle of it all was Smokey Robinson. His voice was smooth and emotional, but it was his songwriting that made him truly valuable. Gordy quickly realized that Smokey had a special gift with words. He could write love songs that felt honest, songs that people could understand immediately. Instead of complicated lyrics, Smokey used simple phrases that carried deep emotion. One of the songs that truly introduced his writing style to the world was The Tracks of My Tears. When the song was released, people instantly connected with it. The lyrics told a story about someone hiding heartbreak behind a smile. It was gentle, but powerful. Listeners heard something real in Smokey's voice. And suddenly, his reputation began to grow. But Smokey wasn't just writing for himself or for the Miracles. Gordy began asking him to write songs for other Motown artists. One of the groups he worked closely with was the Temptations. Smokey wrote the song My Girl, which would become one of the most famous songs in Motown history. The melody was simple and joyful. The lyrics were warm and sincere. When the song hit the radio, it spread quickly across the country. Another group benefiting from Smokey's songwriting was the Supremes. At that time, the Motown family was growing into something special. Artists supported each other. Writers shared ideas. Musicians helped shape the sound together. And Smokey Robinson became one of the creative engines behind it. Then came another unforgettable hit, The Tears of a Clown. The song had a playful melody, but the lyrics told a deeper story about hiding sadness behind laughter. That contrast became one of Smokey Robinson's trademarks. Happy music with emotional words. People around Motown began calling him the label's greatest poet. Even Bob Dylan once famously described Smokey Robinson as America's greatest living poet. By the mid-1960s, Smokey Robinson wasn't just a singer anymore. He was one of the most important figures in Motown. But success always comes with pressure. And soon, the weight of everything he was carrying began to build. Success at Motown Records came with a price. For Smokey Robinson, life quickly turned into a constant cycle of recording, touring, and writing. There were weeks when he barely slept. He would spend the day in the studio writing songs or recording with the Miracles. Then he would travel across the country for live performances. Concert after concert, city after city. Sometimes they performed multiple shows in a single day. Airplanes, buses, hotel rooms, and dressing rooms became the routine. Fans saw the polished performances on stage. But behind the scenes, the pace was exhausting. Motown was determined to dominate the music charts. Gordy pushed his artists hard because he believed they could compete with any label in the country. And Smokey Robinson felt a personal responsibility to keep delivering hits. He kept writing songs. He kept recording. And he kept touring. By the late 1960s, Smokey was working almost non-stop. The success was incredible, but the lifestyle was draining. He was married. He had responsibilities at home. But most of his time was spent on the road or inside the studio. Sometimes he barely had time to sit quietly and think. Still, he continued pushing forward. The fans expected it. Motown expected it. And Smokey Robinson expected it from himself. Eventually, the pressure became too heavy. In 1972, after more than a decade of intense work, Smokey made a surprising decision. He stepped away from performing with the Miracles. The decision shocked many fans. The Miracles had been his group from the beginning. Their voices and harmonies had helped define the Motown sound. But Smokey felt he needed a change. He wanted to focus more on songwriting and helping Motown behind the scenes. Gordy trusted him deeply, so Smokey took on a larger role within the company. But even though he stepped away from touring with the group, the pressure didn't completely disappear. The music industry was changing. New artists were rising. New sounds were appearing. And Smokey Robinson was still trying to keep up with it all. For a while, things stayed steady. But during the late 1970s and early 1980s, something began to shift inside his personal life. A struggle that few people knew about was beginning to take control. To the public, Smokey Robinson always looked calm. His voice was soft. His image was clean. He seemed like one of the most stable figures in the music world. But behind the scenes, he was dealing with something serious. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Smokey Robinson fell into drug addiction. It didn't happen overnight. Like many artists who had spent years under intense pressure, the lifestyle around him slowly pulled him in that direction. At first, it felt like a way to escape the exhaustion, the long nights, the stress, the constant expectations. But what started as something small eventually grew into a serious problem. Cocaine became a daily habit. Some days he used it constantly. He later admitted that the addiction reached a point where he didn't feel like himself anymore. Friends and family began noticing changes. His behavior was different. His energy was different. But addiction often hides itself well, especially for someone living in the spotlight. Years passed while Smokey struggled privately. He later said there were times when he felt like he was losing control of his own life. The music that once gave him joy started to feel distant. And the man who had written so many emotional songs about love and heartbreak was now facing a battle inside his own mind. Eventually, the situation became impossible to ignore. Smokey Robinson realized he was heading down a path that could destroy everything he had built. His career, his relationships, his life. That realization became a turning point, because something happened that would change everything. In the early 1980s, Smokey Robinson reached a moment that forced him to confront his addiction. He later described the experience as a wake-up call. Years of drug use had taken a serious toll on his body and mind. The lifestyle he had been living was no longer sustainable. At some point, Smokey Robinson made a decision. He had to stop. Recovery was not easy. Addiction doesn't disappear overnight. It takes time, discipline, and support. Family members helped him during the process. Friends encouraged him to rebuild his life. Most importantly, Smokey began reconnecting with his faith. That spiritual foundation gave him strength during the hardest moments of recovery. Slowly, his life began to stabilize again. And something else happened during that time. His creativity returned. In 1987, Smokey released one of the biggest songs of his solo career, Just to See Her. The song became a massive hit. It climbed the charts and introduced Smokey Robinson to a new generation of listeners. For many fans, it felt like a comeback. But for Smokey, it was something deeper. It was proof that he had survived one of the darkest periods of his life. He began performing again, recording music, and appearing in public with a renewed sense of purpose. People who saw him during those years noticed a change. He looked healthier. He sounded more peaceful. The struggles hadn't erased the talent that had always been inside him. Instead, they had reshaped the way he looked at life. Smokey Robinson continued performing for decades after that comeback. Through the 1990s, the 2000s, and even into his 80s, he remained connected to the music that had defined his life. But time never stops moving. And eventually, the man who had spent more than 60 years singing, writing, and traveling would begin to face a question he had never truly answered before. How long can someone keep going? By the time Smokey Robinson reached his late 70s, most artists from his era had already stepped away from performing. But Smokey kept going. Year after year, he continued touring across the United States and overseas. Fans who grew up with his music still filled theaters to hear the songs that had become part of their lives. When the lights went down and the band started playing the first notes of the tracks of My Tears, The audience often reacted the same way. People stood up. Some sang along quietly. Others closed their eyes and simply listened. For many fans, hearing Smokey Robinson live wasn't just a concert. It was a connection to their past. Even in his late 70s and early 80s, Smokey still walked on stage with a gentle smile. His movements were slower than they used to be, but the warmth in his voice remained. The shows were different from the early Motown years. In the 1960s, performances were fast and energetic. Artists moved across the stage constantly, dancing in sharp choreography. Now, the performances felt calmer. Smokey often stood near the microphone and focused on telling the stories behind the songs. He would talk to the crowd between performances, remembering the early days of Motown Records in Detroit. Sometimes he spoke about his old friend Gordy. Other nights he talked about the young musicians who had gathered inside that small Motown studio without realizing they were about to change music history. Fans appreciated those moments. They weren't just hearing songs anymore. They were hearing memories. But performing in your 80s comes with challenges. Travel becomes harder. Long flights feel longer. Recovering after a show takes more time than it used to. People close to Smokey began noticing the physical strain. Some nights he looked tired after leaving the stage. Other nights he needed extra time to rest before traveling to the next city. Still, he kept going. Because music had been part of his life since he was a teenager standing on street corners in Detroit. Walking away from that life wasn't something he could easily imagine. But as the years moved closer to his mid-80s, a quiet question began forming in his mind. How long should he continue? And what would it mean to finally stop? Turning 86 changed the way Smokey Robinson looked at his life. For decades he had kept moving forward without slowing down. Recording, touring, writing songs, meeting fans. But age brings a different kind of awareness. He started thinking more about time. The hours spent traveling from city to city. The nights away from home. The physical effort it takes to perform under stage lights for thousands of people. Those things had once felt exciting. Now they felt heavier. People close to Smokey say the conversations began quietly. Family members talked with him about the future. Friends asked how he was feeling after long tours. Doctors also reminded him that the human body eventually needs rest. There wasn't a single dramatic moment that forced the decision. Instead, it slowly built over time. One evening after a performance, Smokey sat backstage longer than usual. The band had packed their instruments. The crowd had gone home. The building had grown quiet. Moments like that gave him time to think. He realized he had been performing for more than 60 years. Very few artists in history had careers that long. He had already achieved everything most musicians only dream about. Hit songs, awards, respect from other artists, generations of fans who still loved his voice. So the question changed. It wasn't about whether he could continue performing. It was about whether he should. Eventually, Smokey Robinson made a decision. He would begin preparing for a goodbye. Not a dramatic farewell tour. Not a huge public announcement. Something simpler. Something personal. He wanted to speak directly to the fans who had supported him since the beginning. And he wanted them to hear the message from him, not from headlines or rumors. So he decided to record something. A message. When Smokey Robinson finally sat down to record his message, the setup was simple. There was no stage, no audience, just a quiet room, a camera, and a man who had spent most of his life standing in front of microphones. This time was different. Instead of singing, Smokey was talking. He looked into the camera the way someone speaks to an old friend. His voice sounded softer than fans remembered, but the warmth was still there. He began by thanking the people who had followed his music for decades. He spoke about the early days with the Miracles, about recording songs inside that tiny Motown studio in Detroit, about the journey that had taken him around the world. Then he paused. For a moment, the room was quiet. When he continued speaking, his words carried a different tone. He explained that after more than 60 years of performing, he had been thinking seriously about the future. He said he was grateful that he had been able to sing for so long, but he also admitted that time changes things. Travel is harder. Energy fades. The body doesn't always cooperate the way it once did. Smokey didn't use dramatic language. He didn't make a big emotional speech. Instead, he spoke honestly. He told fans that he believed it might finally be time to step away from the stage. Not because he didn't love music anymore, but because he wanted to spend the remaining years of his life in a quieter way. When the video was released, fans reacted almost immediately. Clips of the message spread across social media. People shared memories of the first time they heard The Tears of a Clown or other Motown classics. Some fans said they cried while watching the message. Others simply thanked him for the music he had given them. But many people were still asking the same question. Was this really the end? Or was there something deeper behind his decision? For fans around the world, the idea of Smokey Robinson saying goodbye felt almost impossible. His voice had been part of American music for so long that it seemed like it would always be there. But the truth behind his decision was much simpler than many people expected. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a sudden tragedy. It was time. More than 6 decades had passed since the young singer from Detroit first stepped into a recording studio with the Miracles. Since then, Smokey Robinson had written hundreds of songs. He had helped shape the sound of Motown Records. He had influenced generations of artists who came after him. But even legends grow older. Friends close to Smokey say that in recent years he had begun focusing more on family and personal peace. He wanted more time away from airports and tour buses. More quiet mornings at home. More time to reflect on the life he had lived. The truth is that Smokey Robinson never expected his career to last this long. When he first started singing as a teenager, success itself felt like a distant dream. Now, at 86, he had lived long enough to see his music become part of history. Songs he wrote in his 20s were still being played by younger generations. Artists across different genres continued covering his work. That kind of legacy is rare. So when Smokey Robinson recorded his message to fans, it wasn't really about an ending. It was about closing a chapter that had already lasted longer than most people ever imagined. The voice that once echoed through Motown studios and concert halls around the world was finally slowing down. But the songs he left behind would continue playing. On old records. On radio stations. On streaming playlists discovered by people who weren't even born when those songs were first recorded. And somewhere, perhaps in a quiet room far away from the stage lights, the man who wrote them would finally have the chance to sit back and listen.